I live in Rockport, Maine, where gossip travels faster than the tide. My place is a rented salt box near the harbor, clean, quiet, and nobody's idea of impressive. I keep the blinds simple and the pantry stocked. I don't collect applause. Tonight I simmered clam chowder the way my mother taught me, heavy cream, thyme, cracked pepper. I set out 3 bowls and the good spoons. At 6:12 p.m., I got a text from my daughter, Haley. Haley, running late. Brad's showing me a real kitchen. Haley, you'll love it, Dad. Actual marble, not laminate. At 6:29 p.m., my son Mason pulled up first. He parked his spotless company SUV behind my '99 pickup and took a picture like he'd found a museum exhibit. Haley arrived 2 minutes later with her phone already recording. For close friends. She walked in, wrinkled her nose, and said, "This place smells nostalgic." "Chowder," I said. "Sit." Mason fiddled with the ladle like it might bite. "Brad booked us a table at the Anchorage last week. Swordfish, wine pairings. You could have come, Dad. If you dressed the part." I ladled soup. "I'm dressed to eat." Haley tapped her nails on the table. "Brad thinks you should at least look into a new car. The pickup it's a narrative. Not a good one." I'd heard that word narrative since the divorce. Karen, my ex, uses it the way other people say weather. She believes life is PR. My kids learned it young. "Drink water," I said. "Chowder's rich." They looked at the bowls like I'd served them a lawsuit. Mason slid his phone across the table. A photo of a Range Rover with a bow. "Brad says if I hit my Q4, he'll help with the down payment. Family supports family, you know?" Haley swiped to a listing for a waterfront loft. "He's also talking to a lender for me. With my commissions, it's practically done." She looked around, my kitchen painted pine cabinets, a humming old fridge, and added, "You could help too. I mean, if you weren't so stubborn about money." "Stubborn," I said. "Or private." She laughed. "Secretive. Sometimes it feels toxic, like you want to watch us struggle so you can say I told you so. What's the word, Mason? Narcissist?" "Narcissist," Mason smiled without warmth. "Or enabler, depending on the week. Maybe you like being needed. Except you're not, Dad. Brad actually shows up." I took a breath. "I have a will and a safe deposit box and bank accounts nobody in this kitchen has seen. I built what I built quietly, with W-2 seconds and overtime pay and index funds. I never thought privacy would be treated like a crime." Haley raised her phone. "Smile," she said. "We'll caption it Cozy Night with Dad." And then she whispered, "So people won't think we abandoned you." Mason stirred his chowder once and pushed it away. "I can't post this, Hale." The bowls chipped. Haley texted under the table. My watch buzzed with a forwarded screenshot. 2 seconds later, her close friend's story. My pickup, my porch light, the caption, "Rescue Mission," with a siren emoji. A second bubble popped up in the family thread. "Karen, be kind. He's sensitive." Karen. "Ethan, Brad says he can help you evaluate a real retirement strategy. No more cash-only habits." I laughed, and it surprised me. Cash only? I've filed taxes every year since 1985. I have written evidence of every dollar I've earned. "What I don't have," I said, "is patience for this kind of theater." Haley rolled her eyes. "See, gaslighting. He makes it sound like we're crazy for wanting better." Mason leaned back. "It's embarrassing, Dad. The truck, the rental, this vibe. We didn't even invite you to Haley's lender dinner because what?" I asked. "Because image matters," Haley said. "We love you. But boundaries. Like, keep your aesthetic low-key when it affects our deals." That word boundaries lands different when it's used as a weapon. I stood, took their bowls, and rinsed them clean. No yelling, no lecture. I dried my hands on a towel I've had for 20 years and turned back to my children. "Get out," I said. Haley blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Take your phones, your comments, your consultant speak. Get out of my house." Mason scoffed. "You'll regret this when you need help. I'll take my chances." They walked to the door with theatrical slowness, waiting for me to apologize. I didn't. The night air came in cold and salted. Mason paused on the threshold. "Brad says this is what narcissists do," he said. "They isolate." "Tell Brad I said good luck with Q4, I replied. They left. The house went quiet the way ocean air goes quiet, heavy, honest. I sat at the table and looked at the chowder cooling in their untouched bowls. Then I opened my laptop, signed into the accounts no one knew about, and pulled up property records for 2 addresses I happened to recognize. I don't collect applause. I collect receipts. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your thoughts echo. I sat in the kitchen long after the streetlights clicked off outside, the air heavy with the smell of leftover chowder and burnt pride. On the counter sat the little wooden lighthouse I'd carved for Haley when she was 8. The paint was chipped now, the bottom etched with her crooked handwriting. Dad, be my lighthouse. I turned it over in my hands until the memory blurred into something sharp. Somewhere along the way, the girl who once saw me as a light decided I was an anchor instead. I opened my laptop again, not to brood this time, but to look. My passwords were muscle memory, 30 years of habit and discipline. The brokerage dashboard glowed like an X-ray of a secret life. Mutual funds, bonds, long-term holdings, cash accounts spread across institutions. Numbers that didn't shout, just waited. Quiet proof that restraint had been worth something after all. Still, staring at those zeros didn't feel like victory. It felt like evidence of how long I'd let people think I was small just because it was easier than fighting. That's when the thought hit me like a slap. Was I enabling their toxic behavior all this time by being too nice? Every time I said nothing, every time I picked up the dinner tab, every time I swallowed the insult, had I been training them to treat me this way? The word enabler stuck. I hated how accurate it sounded. I'd spent decades mistaking tolerance for love. Maybe that's the curse of quiet people. We think endurance is virtue, but it's just silence dressed as peace. I needed facts, not feelings. Facts I could control. I opened the Rockport County Property Records database, a clunky government portal that still looked like 2003. I typed Mason's address first. The condo complex where he bragged about city views wasn't even owned by him. It belonged to a holding company called Atlantic Equity Partners. I cross-referenced it with state filings. The company was in default on 2 commercial loans, auction pending within 90 days. The irony made me exhale through my nose. My son was paying inflated rent to a landlord drowning in debt, and he'd called me financially illiterate. Then I looked up Haley's latest listing. I'd seen it online, a coastal cottage, staged to perfection, sunlight, and throw pillows. The county site showed 3 open code violations and a pending complaint from a retired couple who'd discovered a cracked foundation after closing. There it was again. Image over integrity. She was selling the dream the way her mother did, pretending the rot didn't matter as long as the lighting was good. I bookmarked every document, downloaded PDFs, and renamed them systematically. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them yet, but something in me had shifted from hurt to focus. If they respected only power, then maybe it was time they learned what real control looked like. Quiet, legal, undeniable. At 2:43 a.m., I made a pot of coffee, the cheap kind that tastes like burnt pennies. The kettle hissed, the house groaned, and I realized how free I felt. No expectations, no performance, just me and the numbers that had always told the truth. I drafted an email to a local law office I'd read about months earlier. Ava Delgado, attorney at law, real estate and civil litigation. I typed 3 lines. Miss Delgado, I may need advice regarding certain property interests and privacy matters. Confidentiality is essential. Can you meet this week? Ethan Walker. Before I hit send, I glanced once more at the little lighthouse on the counter. I thought about what Haley wrote, "Be my lighthouse," and realized maybe I finally understood what that meant. A lighthouse doesn't chase the ships that ignore it. It just stands there, steady, letting them crash if they must. I clicked send. Ava replied before noon the next day. Her email was short, professional, and somehow warm at the same time. Mr. Walker, I can meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. My office is above the post office on Main Street. Bring any documents you think are relevant. We'll talk privately. That, privately, was what convinced me. In small towns like Rockport, privacy is an endangered species. People can't mind their own business because it's the only entertainment they've got. When I walked into Ava's office, it didn't smell like a lawyer's place. No perfume of power or fake hospitality, just paper, salt air, and black coffee. The walls were lined with old maritime maps, and one quote framed behind her desk caught my eye. You can't negotiate with manipulation. She looked up from her computer, mid-30s, sharp eyes that missed nothing. No wedding ring, a stack of highlighted case files to her right. You must be Ethan, she said. You look like a man who's been holding his breath for too long. Accurate, I said, handing her the folder. Family drama, financial crossover. Probably both toxic and boring at the same time. Those are my two specialties, she said, almost smiling. I told her everything, or at least enough to paint the picture. The dinner, the insults, the gaslighting, the years of being the family scapegoat. She listened the way good therapists do. No pity, no interruptions. Just a steady current of attention that made me talk more than I'd planned to. When I was done, she flipped through the property records I'd printed, scanning the highlighted sections. You've been sitting on real leverage for decades, she said finally. That's rare. I've been sitting on patience, I corrected. Maybe too much of it. Patience becomes paralysis if you never draw a line, she said, jotting notes in the margin. What you're describing isn't family conflict. It's a long-term boundary collapse. You gave them too much room, and they mistook kindness for weakness. The word boundaries landed heavier than I expected. It wasn't therapy talk coming from her. It sounded like case law. So, what's next? I asked. She leaned back, assessing me. You want revenge or resolution? I thought about it. Is both an option? Sometimes, she said, but we'll do it clean. No emotional sabotage, no illegal shortcuts. You win by being correct on paper and in person. That's how you take back control from narcissists. You starve them of chaos. Her logic hit like fresh air. For the first time in months, I felt less like a victim and more like a chess player. Ava spread the documents across her desk. Here's what we can do. You acquire the distressed loan on your son's apartment building. Completely legal. Done through a trust to keep you anonymous. I'll handle the filings. As for your daughter's real estate issues, we collect the public complaints and make sure the right regulatory bodies notice them. Quietly, I nodded, trying to keep my pulse steady. And Brad the stepfather, he's tied up in both properties indirectly. Construction loans, contractor bonds. Contractor. Ava smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Then he's already halfway trapped by his own image. Men like that usually overextend. We won't attack him, we'll just remove the illusions he depends on. I laughed softly. You sound like you've done this before. She shrugged. Let's say I grew up watching my own mother lose too much to people who confused control with love. I learned early that sometimes the only way to heal is to reclaim the power they stole. That line stayed with me long after I left her office. Outside, the wind coming off the harbor was sharp and cold, but I felt something different stirring underneath it. Clarity. I'd walked in feeling like a beggar with secrets. I walked out with a plan and an ally who spoke the language of boundaries better than anyone I'd ever met. Maybe this wasn't about payback anymore. Maybe it was about balance finally making the scales even after all these years. That night I sent Ava a confirmation email. I'm ready. Do whatever needs to be done. Her reply came within minutes. Then let's begin. Quietly, strategically, and without apology. Ava didn't waste time. By Monday morning, she'd already looped in a title agent, a financial contact in Portland, and someone at the county clerk's office who owed her a favor. Watching her work was like seeing precision disguised as calm, every move clean, every call measured. She explained it to me over coffee at a diner on Main Street, sliding a legal pad between our plates, like we were plotting a quiet coup. First, she said, the company that owns your son's apartment complex, North Shore Residential Holdings, took out 2 bridge loans during the pandemic. Both are delinquent. If we buy the senior lien through a trust, we become the secured creditor. Translation: we can dictate rent adjustments or foreclose if necessary. I blinked. You make it sound surgical. It is, she said, stirring her coffee. Never fight narcissists with noise. You fight them with paperwork. She wasn't joking. By the end of the week, she'd already filed the paperwork to form Beacon Point Trust, a shell entity that would carry my investments without my name attached. The title alone felt poetic. Beacon Point, like that lighthouse sitting in my kitchen window. The next phase was Brad. The man's construction company, Whitaker Coastal Design, had built its reputation on flash, social media drone tours, glossy brochures, and promises of coastal luxury. Ava's contact pulled the filings. The numbers told a less glamorous story. 2 of his projects had stalled. He was juggling 3 separate credit lines and cross-collateralizing them with personal assets. He's leveraged to the gills, Ava said. All it takes is one domino. And Haley? I asked. Ava turned a page in her folder. Your daughter's brokerage is on thin ice. The state licensing board received at least 2 preliminary complaints about false disclosures. Nothing fatal yet, but if one of those goes public, her brand takes a hit, especially if a well-documented complaint reaches the right inspector. There was no malice in her tone, just clarity. I sipped my coffee, trying to reconcile strategy with morality. "I'm not trying to ruin them," I said quietly. "I just want to stop being their punching bag." "That's the difference," Ava said. "Revenge is about destruction. Boundaries are about correction. You're not breaking anything, they already cracked it themselves. You're just shining a light." She tapped the legal pad again. "Here's the roadmap. Acquire the distressed note on Mason's building. Secure the collateral interest on one of Brad's project loans through secondary purchase, completely legal. Compile and archive the open complaints against Haley's brokerage. No leaks, no rumors, just documentation. If she crosses the line, the system will handle it." I looked down at the pad, the columns of tasks written in her neat, looping handwriting. "You've done this before," I said. "Not for a client like you," she replied. "Usually, people come to me wanting blood. You came wanting peace. That makes you dangerous in the best possible way." Something about that line sat deep in me. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to their chaos, I was planning. I wasn't trapped inside their image anymore. I was building something of my own. We finished our coffee, and she gathered the papers. Before leaving, she added one last note to her list. "Ensure compliance review, no exposure risk." Then she looked at me and said, "Ethan, if we do this right, no one will even realize you moved the chessboard until the game's already over." Walking home, the wind off the harbor bit through my jacket, but it felt cleaner somehow, like air after a storm that hadn't fully started yet. For the first time, I could see the shape of something steady ahead. Not revenge, not dominance, just balance. The lighthouse in my window caught the sunset when I got home. I turned it toward the water and whispered, "All right then, let's start shining." The deal went through faster than I expected. Ava moved like wind through paperwork, no noise, no loose ends. Within 3 weeks, Beacon Point Trust officially owned the senior lien on Mason's apartment complex. A single transaction, filed on a quiet Thursday afternoon, and just like that, I had the power to make decisions about the very place he bragged about owning emotionally. Ava called that evening. "You're now the secured creditor, Ethan. That means if rent's not adjusted or payments lapse, the trust has the right to act. Completely above board. You ready for what that means?" I laughed softly. Ready's a big word. Let's call it overdue. We drafted the adjustment notice, a carefully worded document citing market rate increases, inflation, and operational costs. It wasn't cruel. It was math. The letterhead didn't carry my name, just Beacon Point Trust and an address in Portland. Rent would rise by 40% within 60 days. I mailed it, certified. 2 days later, Mason called. He didn't start with hello. "Did you hear what that damn landlord's doing? Rent's going up nearly $2,000. It's extortion." I kept my tone even. "That's rough, son. Maybe talk to management. See what your lease says." His laugh was short, bitter. "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? The universe finally giving me a taste of my own medicine. Don't pretend you don't enjoy this. I'm not enjoying anything. But I do believe in responsibility." "Ken," he went quiet for a second, then hissed, "You know what? You're toxic, Dad. You always talk about responsibility, like it's moral currency. Some of us don't have the luxury to sit on our high horse and count principles. Some of us have to actually live. Some of us," I said, "learn to live within our means." Click. The line went dead. An hour later, Haley texted, "Haley, Mason says you're laughing about his rent. Is that true?" "Highly. You're being cruel. This isn't who you are." "Haley, or maybe it's who you've always been, just hiding behind that humble man act." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood silence could be its own boundary. That night, I went over the trust documents again. Every line was airtight. Ava had made sure of it. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing my name appear nowhere, and yet knowing every decision led back to me. For decades, they'd made me invisible. Now invisibility was my weapon. The next morning, Ava called to confirm receipt. "They'll start panicking soon," she said matter-of-factly. "You'll want to brace for the guilt campaign tears, manipulation, maybe public shaming. Stay neutral. You're not punishing anyone. You're enforcing terms. I told her I was fine, but truthfully, part of me was shaking. I wasn't used to control. Power feels strange when you've spent a lifetime apologizing for wanting it. By the end of the week, Mason's tone had shifted from anger to pleading. Another call. Dad, listen. I'm not asking for charity. I just need a short loan. A few thousand until I figure this rent mess out. It's temporary. I'll pay you back. In the clicking present, I'm sure you will, I said quietly. But I can't. You can't, or you won't. Does it matter? He exploded. You'd rather see your own son evicted than help him for once in your damn life. No wonder Mom left you. There it was. The reflex cruelty. The deflection. A narcissist's defense. Make the other person feel guilty for your consequences. I let him finish before replying. You're an adult, Mason. You make choices. Choices have outcomes. You've had the world bail you out for years. Maybe this is when you learn to swim. He hung up again, this time leaving a voicemail seconds later. The message was just breathing, angry, fast, scared. I listened once, then deleted it. When Ava checked in later, I told her everything. She just said, "That's what accountability sounds like when it breaks the first time." After we hung up, I sat by the window watching the fog roll over the harbor. The lighthouse out on the breakwater blinked its steady rhythm against the gray. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was clean, like something toxic had finally drained out of me. For years, I'd confused kindness with surrender. I'd thought being the good guy meant absorbing their storms. But maybe goodness isn't about taking hits, it's about knowing when to step out of the ring. I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened the rent notice one last time, and folded it neatly back into its envelope. Justice didn't need to shout. It just needed to arrive on schedule. Word travels faster than truth in Rockport. By the time the new rent notices landed, half the town had an opinion about me. Most of them were wrong. It started at the coffee shop on Harbor Street. The barista, usually chatty, handed me my mug with that tight-lipped politeness people reserve for scandal. I heard it in her tone, pity disguised as courtesy. At the table near the window, a couple of retirees whispered my name between sips. One of them finally said it out loud. Poor guy's lost it. Turned on his own kids. By noon, Karen was doing damage control, or at least her version of it. She posted a picture of Mason's apartment building on Facebook with a caption that read, "Family is about love, not power." Some people forget that. Within hours, the comments section filled up with sympathy emojis and phrases like, "Praying for your family and toxic cycles must end." None of them asked for the full story, of course. They never do. Brad added his part at the golf club that weekend. "Ethan's always been difficult," he reportedly said, polishing his ego between shots. "He's bitter, and now he's making everyone else pay for it." She be one-er. It was almost funny, watching them curate their image of me, the bitter ex-husband, the jealous father, the lonely old man clinging to control. They didn't even realize how transparent it was. Narcissists hate losing the narrative more than they hate losing money. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. It's one thing to be disliked by your family. It's another to become a villain in your own hometown. That night, I took a walk to clear my head. The air smelled like salt and rain. As I passed the old pier, I saw Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, the retired couple who'd bought a house through Haley's agency. I'd read their complaint-cracked foundation, water damage, empty promises. They recognized me but looked uncertain, as if unsure which version of me they were allowed to believe. "Evening," I said, stopping at the fence. "Rough season for home repairs, huh?" Mrs. Henderson sighed. "You could say that. We filed a report, but it's also confusing. They make you feel like it's your fault for not reading the fine print." I nodded. "You're not crazy. Some agents rely on confusion. It's how they keep the commissions." She frowned. "You sound like you've been through this." "In a different way," I said. "But yes, before I left, I offered to help them draft a letter to the state licensing board not as revenge, but as fairness. I told them how to reference inspection dates, cite the missing disclosures, attach photos. They thanked me like I'd done something heroic, but it didn't feel heroic. It felt corrective. When I got home, I placed the draft copy of their letter next to the small wooden lighthouse on my counter. Its paint was peeling worse now, but that felt fitting. It didn't need to be perfect to do its job. The next few days, I stayed quiet. I stopped checking social media. I stopped defending myself to people who had already chosen their version of the story. Ava's voice echoed in my head. Never explain integrity to an audience that benefits from misunderstanding you. Instead, I focused on small things, sanding the porch rail, oiling the hinges, making coffee in the chipped mug Haley once called embarrassing. The world could gossip itself hoarse. I wasn't going to feed it. Then came the envelope from the Hendersons. Inside was a handwritten note. We sent the complaint. Thank you for helping us stand up for ourselves. We hope you find peace with your own family someday. I set it next to the lighthouse, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something steady. Not joy exactly, something deeper. Like I was remembering the version of myself that existed before the noise. That night, the harbor fog rolled in heavy, the kind that swallows sound. I stood by the window and watched the faint beam from the real lighthouse cut through the mist. It blinked, constant and patient, even though the ships couldn't always see it. I realized that's what boundaries really are. Not walls, not vengeance, just light. They don't stop people from crashing into you, but they make sure you're not lost when they do. By early spring, everything started to tighten like a net being pulled from the edges. Ava warned me this part would come. When you start changing the story, Ethan, she'd said, they'll come for control, not truth. And they did. Brad's luxury development, the one with his face plastered on billboards under the slogan redefining the coastline, hit a wall. The city council suspended new permits after discovering discrepancies in his funding disclosures. The whispers reached me through town gossip first. Unpaid contractors, stalled materials, nervous investors. Brad filed for temporary creditor protection, claiming pandemic losses. Ava smirked when she told me. He's circling the wagons, she said. Classic overextension. He'll blame anyone he can to keep his image alive. Meanwhile, Karen ramped up her public sympathy tour. She told friends at church that I'd lost perspective, that I was weaponizing money against our children. She called Mason's eviction financial abuse. When those words hit my ears, I almost laughed. I'd spent 30 years working overtime to keep them comfortable, and now restraint was being rebranded as cruelty. Mason tried to file a complaint of his own, a tenant grievance against Beacon Point Trust. Ava sent me the form. It was half-filled, riddled with errors, and clearly written by someone more emotional than informed. We'll respond formally, Ava said. No emotion, just law. Emotion is what they count on. The hardest blow came from Haley. A client filed a full complaint with the State Real Estate Board, false staging, omitted flood history, falsified disclosures. It wasn't my doing. Ava made sure of that. It came from the couple I'd quietly helped. The board sent her a notice of preliminary review. When Haley found out, she called me crying. Dad, please, she said between gasps. I know what you think, but this isn't who I am. I didn't mean to cut corners. It's how everyone does business now. You know that. I don't, I said simply. She paused. Can you fix it? Maybe call someone? I could, I said. But I won't. Why not? She demanded. Because I already did too much fixing when you were growing up. You didn't learn boundaries because I erased all of mine. Her silence on the line felt like a confession. Then she whispered, You've changed. I've stopped apologizing, I said. That's not the same thing. Ava called later that day with a tone I'd learned meant both good and bad news. Brad's financials are public now, she said. He's juggling loans from 3 banks. One of them, Northern Coastal, sold a portion of his collateralized debt. Guess who bought it? I'm afraid to ask. Beacon Point Trust, she said, smiling through the phone. He's your partial debtor now. Congratulations, Ethan. You legally own a piece of your ex-wife's new husband. Had with Rumander. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or vomit. Ava, this feels like divine irony. Not divine, she corrected. Just math. The news spread fast. Brad stormed into Ava's office the next morning, shouting about manipulation and targeted harassment. She later told me how calm she stayed. I let him talk for 5 full minutes. Then I handed him the contract showing his signature authorizing the loan sale. He went pale. Men like him crumble when paper talks louder than pride. As Brad scrambled, Karen called me again, this time furious instead of performative. You're ruining us, she said. Is this what you wanted? To humiliate my husband? To punish your children? Let's not like did. I didn't humiliate anyone, I said. I just stopped protecting lies. You think this makes you noble? No, I said. It makes me free. Her voice cracked. They're your family. Family doesn't mean submission, Karen. It means accountability. She hung up. Later that week, Ava came over with 2 coffees and a stack of updates. They're pushing back hard, she said. Mason's lawyer filed a claim for emotional distress due to retaliatory landlord conduct. It's nonsense. But they're hoping to trigger discovery. What do? We answer with precision. I'll file a counter motion citing non-retaliatory intent. Every step of Beacon Point's actions aligns with market regulation. If they push further, we let the facts suffocate the noise. She leaned back, studying me. How are you holding up? I thought about it. Better than I should be. Worse than I'll admit. That's fair, she said softly. But remember, people like them rely on emotional chaos. Don't give them the performance they're fishing for. The following morning, an email came from Ava. City hearing set. Creditors review in 2 weeks. Haley's disciplinary meeting confirmed. Mason's claim under review. Prepare statements but no contact. It was surreal. For decades, they'd controlled the story through shame, through comparison, through entitlement. Now, everything had shifted. They were reacting to me. That night, I sat by the harbor and watched the tide slap against the rocks. The world didn't feel smaller or bigger, it just felt real again. Ava's last words over the phone echoed as the wind whipped through the docks. They're choosing the battlefield, Ethan. But they don't realize you already built the ground they're standing on. The courthouse smelled like old paper and fear. It always does. Ava and I sat in the back row, waiting for Mason's case to be called. His bankruptcy petition, his tenant grievance, his final attempt to weaponize victimhood. The judge's clerk moved through the docket, the rhythm steady, merciless. When she finally said, case number 4723B Simmons versus Beacon Point Trust, Mason's name echoed through the room like a bad memory. He walked in, wearing a suit that didn't fit, eyes sunken from weeks of stress. Haley followed behind him, avoiding my gaze. Karen and Brad took seats on the far side, pretending not to know me. I could feel their judgment like static in the air, but for once, I didn't care. The judge, a woman with sharp glasses and no patience for theatrics, read the summary. Plaintiff claims financial distress caused by rent escalation and alleged retaliatory conduct by Beacon Point Trust. Defendant holds valid ownership of lien and property interest. Both sides present, and their fine cheese was an after. Ava stood. For the defense, Your Honor. Mason's lawyer looked half his age and twice as nervous. For the plaintiff, it started as a formality. Dates, documents, signatures. But when Ava began cross-referencing the filings, each loan, each payment, each notice, it turned into something else. It was like watching a surgeon remove diseased tissue, piece by piece. Calm, precise, irrefutable. The rent adjustment, she said, was based on verified market trends and executed in compliance with state housing law. The plaintiff signed the new lease and defaulted on payments. There was no retaliation, only enforcement of terms. The judge flipped through the exhibits. Everything appears in order. I am. Then Mason stood, interrupting. This is all manipulation. He's behind this, my father. He's hiding behind that trust like a coward. The room went still. The judge looked up. Mr. Simmons, you'll speak through counsel, but he wouldn't stop. He's doing this to destroy us. You don't know what he's like, always pretending to be the victim while making everyone else miserable. Ava didn't flinch. She just placed a folder on the table and spoke evenly. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to clarify ownership records. The judge nodded. Ava turned to me. Mr. Walker, you may confirm for the record. I rose. My voice didn't shake. Yes, Your Honor. I'm the trustee and beneficiary of Beacon Point Trust. Mason froze. Haley gasped. Karen's mouth fell open. Brad went pale. The judge's pen stopped midair. So you are the creditor of record? I am, I said. And I've simply exercised my legal right to enforce agreements that my children entered into willingly. There was no retaliation, only accountability. Silence. Then the judge leaned back. Case dismissed with prejudice. The court finds no evidence of misconduct. Defendant retains all rights. The gavel hit wood. Mason sagged into his chair. Haley covered her face. Karen muttered something about monsters wearing halos, but all I felt was release, not joy, not triumph, just a quiet exhale I'd been holding for 30 years. As people filed out, Ava packed her briefcase. "That's it," she said softly. "They can't touch you now." Outside, the wind off the bay hit like a baptism, cold and clean. Mason and Haley followed us down the steps, desperation dripping off them like rain. "Dad, please," Haley said. "We're ruined." "We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said gently. "You just didn't expect consequences." Mason's voice cracked. "You could have helped us. You had the power to fix everything." "I did fix something," I said. "Me." They stood there, broken mirrors reflecting all the years I'd tried to buy peace instead of demanding respect. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. As Ava and I walked away, she said quietly, "They'll rewrite this story in their heads. People like that always do." "I know," I said, "but the truth doesn't need their permission." That night, back home, I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, one for me, one for the empty chair across from me. "Here's to boundaries," I said softly, clinking the air. Ava stopped by later with paperwork. "You're officially in the clear," she said, smiling. "And for the record, my mother would have admired this. She never got to stand up for herself like you did." I looked at her, realizing for the first time that this whole thing wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who's ever been told they're selfish for setting limits, ungrateful for wanting peace, cruel for refusing to be controlled. The next morning, I drove to the bluff outside town, the same spot where the lighthouse watched over the harbor. The air smelled like cedar and salt. I placed the old wooden lighthouse, the one from my kitchen, on the rocks, let the tide take it. It drifted out slowly, bobbing between waves until it was just a speck against the horizon. That's when I understood something Ava had been trying to teach me all along. Revenge ends, but reclamation lasts. I turned back toward the road, feeling the wind on my face and the light at my back. 3 months after the courthouse hearing, Rockport had gone quiet again. The gossip faded, replaced by new scandals, new distractions. People move on fast when the story no longer entertains them, but I didn't move on, I transformed. Life without the constant noise felt strange at first. For years I'd defined my days by someone else's chaos, fixing, apologizing, over-explaining. Now, the silence felt like an unfamiliar luxury. I learned to fill it differently: morning walks by the harbor, evening dinners that didn't end in arguments, and long talks with Ava that had nothing to do with legal strategy. We met often after the case closed, sometimes at the same diner where this all began. She'd bring her laptop, I'd bring curiosity, and somehow, conversations about estate law turned into ones about music, travel, and how people break patterns that feel inherited. One night, I asked her why she took my case so personally. She smiled faintly, stirring her coffee. "Because my father was like your kids," she said. "Entitled, charming, manipulative. My mom died thinking it was her fault for not loving him enough. I used to think helping people like you was my way of apologizing for not saving her." I didn't know what to say. The vulnerability in her voice felt heavier than anything from our case files. "You didn't fail her," I said finally. "You just learned sooner than most that love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude." She looked at me for a long moment and nodded. "That's exactly it." Now, after that, we stopped talking about the past. We started living in the present. In early June, I sold my house in Rockport. Ava helped close the sale. She insisted on handling the paperwork to make sure no ghosts stayed behind. I moved into a small place overlooking the cliffs of Camden, where the air tasted of pine and freedom. It wasn't loneliness, I felt it was peace. For the first time in decades, my phone stayed quiet for days. I didn't have to brace for manipulation disguised as love. I didn't have to wonder what version of me someone else wanted to see. One evening, I got a letter from Haley. No return address, just my name written in her soft, looping handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. Just a single page that read, "I finally understand what you meant. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're a mirror. And sometimes it takes losing someone to see yourself clearly. I hope you're okay. H." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because the letter didn't need an answer. It was proof of growth, hers and mine. That was enough. Brad filed for bankruptcy a month later. Karen tried to spin it as a temporary setback, but the truth was plain. His empire had collapsed under its own arrogance. Mason moved out of state, rumor said, trying to start over under a different company name. I didn't chase the details. Let them rebuild or not. Either way, I was done being the scaffolding that held them upright. One afternoon, I stood on my porch, watching the sea roll in. Ava pulled up, holding a bag of groceries and 2 glasses wrapped in paper. "Celebration," she said. "You're officially unentangled." We poured the wine, the light catching on the glass like the beginning of something gentle. "What are we celebrating exactly?" I asked. She smiled. "The boring miracle of peace. Most people never find it." We toasted, the clink soft but final. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I'd built quietly, intentionally, without apology. Later that night, I stood by the window as the waves crashed below. The moon cast a path of silver across the water, and I thought about that little wooden lighthouse I'd set adrift months ago. Somewhere out there, it was probably gone, washed up, broken, or maybe guiding someone else in a storm, and that felt right. Because what I'd built wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. Revenge ends when the world finally sees what you endured. Reclamation begins when you no longer need them to see it. That's the real story. That's what taking back power looks like. 6 months after everything ended, I finally stopped checking my phone before bed. It sounds small, I know, but for most of my adult life, that device had been an emotional minefield. Missed calls, guilt messages, manipulation disguised as concern. Now, silence was a kind of music. Life in Camden settled into a rhythm that didn't demand explanations. Mornings started with coffee on the porch and the sound of seagulls fighting over nothing. I read again real books, not financial reports. I started sketching too. Nothing good, just lines that helped me think. Ava joked that I was redecorating my piece. Maybe she was right. She visited often. Sometimes for work, sometimes just because. The first time she stayed overnight, we didn't plan it. A storm rolled in from the coast, cutting the power, and we ended up sitting by candlelight, talking for hours about everything that had led us here. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just stayed quiet?" she asked, her face soft in the flicker of light. "All the time," I said. "But then I remember silence was killing me louder than any argument ever did." She smiled. "That's the kind of line you put on a book cover." We both laughed. Over the next few weeks, I realized something that surprised me. Peace doesn't feel triumphant. It feels ordinary. Like the space between breaths, like cooking dinner without dread, or walking without replaying old conversations in your head. That's the real prize, not applause, just calm. One afternoon, I took a drive up the coast to Portland. I stopped by the old office where Ava had handled all the filings. It was closed for renovation. But through the dusty window, I could see the faint outline of that framed quote behind her old desk. "You can't negotiate with manipulation." I smiled. She'd been right from the beginning. You can't bargain with people who see compassion as currency. You just have to withdraw from the trade entirely. When I got home, a small package was waiting on my doorstep. No sender listed, just my name written neatly across the front. Inside was a new wooden lighthouse, handcrafted, polished, with a tiny brass plaque that read, "To New Horizons." Ava's handwriting on the note inside was simple. "You were never just fighting them, Ethan. You were teaching yourself how to stay free." I set the lighthouse on my shelf and watched how the afternoon sun caught on its varnish. For years, I thought control was about power, about proving a point, about getting even. But now I understood. Control isn't domination, it's direction. It's choosing where your energy goes and who actually deserves it. I thought about my kids, about all the pain that had turned into distance. I didn't hate them anymore. Anger had burned itself out, leaving something cleaner behind: acceptance. If they ever reached out again, I wouldn't shut the door, but I also wouldn't reopen the old wound. That's the balance Ava taught me: forgiveness without surrender. That night, we had dinner on the porch, the waves glimmering under a silver moon. Ava poured wine, and we talked about everything except the past. Somewhere in the middle of our laughter, I realized I wasn't surviving anymore, I was living. When she left, I stood at the edge of the cliff, holding the lighthouse in my hands. The wind smelled like rain and salt, the same mix that had carried me through every turning point of this story. I whispered something I hadn't said in years. Thank you. Not to anyone in particular, to life, maybe. To the hard lessons that arrived uninvited but necessary. To the part of me that refused to stay small. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, wild and forgiving. I wasn't a victim anymore, or a villain in someone else's story. I was just a man who finally learned that peace isn't found in revenge. It's found in rebuilding. And as the last light faded behind the horizon, I knew that the storm was finally over. Not because it stopped, but because I'd learned how to stand in it without being afraid. A year passed before I realized I'd stopped measuring time by pain. It wasn't marked by betrayals or legal deadlines anymore, just seasons. The first summer in Camden drifted into autumn like a sigh of relief. The tourists left. The harbor grew quiet, and the wind carried that clean, lonely sound that only small towns by the ocean know. I still woke early, the way I used to when the world felt like a threat waiting to happen. But now, mornings had no edge. I'd brew coffee, feed the stray cat that had started showing up by my porch, and watch the light crawl slowly down the cliffs. Sometimes I'd think about what had happened in Rockport, but the memory didn't sting, it just existed. Like an old scar you forget about until you catch it in the mirror. One crisp October morning, a letter arrived. This one was from Mason. The handwriting was steady, older somehow. I stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Dad, I'm working construction again, but for someone else this time. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I finally understand what you meant about responsibility. I used to think you were punishing me. Now I see you were protecting me from myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I read it twice. No anger, no excuses, no manipulation. Just a man growing up late, but growing up nonetheless. I folded it gently and set it beside Haley's old note in the drawer. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a failure as a father. I felt like someone who had finally stopped raising children and started inspiring adults. Ava came by later that evening, bringing pumpkin pie and her usual calm energy. She noticed the letter on the table but didn't pry. That's something I've always admired about her. She doesn't need to fill silence with questions. I had a strange thought today, I said. Maybe the point wasn't to teach them a lesson. Maybe it was just to remind myself I could survive without being needed. She smiled. That's the hardest lesson of all, learning that love doesn't have to mean rescue. We ate pie in comfortable silence. The sky outside turned the color of ash and gold. The lighthouse at the edge of the bluff flickered to life, just as it always did when dusk fell. It felt like a ritual now, its steady pulse reminding me that consistency isn't weakness, it's strength. Later, as Ava was leaving, she paused at the door. You ever think you might write all this down someday? She asked. I laughed. Who'd want to read a story about an old man and his boundaries? She tilted her head. Anyone who's ever lost themselves trying to keep someone else happy. After she left, I sat down at my desk and looked at the blank notebook I'd been ignoring for months. Maybe she was right. Maybe stories like mine mattered not because they were dramatic, but because they were real. Because somewhere, someone was probably standing where I once stood, afraid to let go, convinced that endurance was love. So I started writing, not to rewrite the past, but to honor it. To document the quiet revolution that happens when you stop begging for understanding and start choosing self-respect. Each page felt lighter than the last, as if the words were untying knots I didn't know were still there. By the time I stopped, the tide had shifted outside, waves crashing harder against the rocks. I watched the spray catch the moonlight, and for a moment, it looked like the sea was glowing. That's when it hit me. Peace isn't a destination, it's maintenance. Like keeping a garden or tending a flame, it requires attention, but not fear. You feed it, you guard it, and you trust it will grow if you stay steady. I closed the notebook and whispered, I'm still here. It wasn't a declaration of defiance, just gratitude. Because after everything, the lies, the betrayal, the years of shrinking myself to fit into other people's comfort zones, I was still standing, still breathing, still learning how to live in the quiet without mistaking it for loneliness. As I turned off the lights, the lighthouse beam swept across the cliffs, landing briefly on my window before disappearing into the sea again. I smiled, realizing I'd finally become my own light. Winter came early that year. The air along the Camden cliffs turned sharp, the kind of cold that forces you to slow down, to notice the way your breath turns visible in front of you. I'd lived through winters before, some outside, most inside myself, but this one felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was quiet. Ava had gone to visit her sister in Vermont for the holidays, leaving me with a house that felt both vast and still. She'd insisted I decorate, at least a little, so I'd hung a single string of lights across the porch. When they flickered against the glass, I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to make things bright for other people. Now, the small glow felt enough. On Christmas morning, I woke to the sound of the ocean crashing harder than usual. A nor'easter was building offshore, the kind that would rattle shutters and flood the low roads by evening. I made coffee, fed the cat, and sat by the window watching the sky turn from gray to steel. That's when I saw it, a package, half buried in snow at the edge of the porch. No return label again, just my name written in neat, deliberate script. Inside was a photo of Mason and Haley standing together in front of a modest house, smiling. The caption on the back read, "We bought this place ourselves. It's small, but it's honest. Thank you for teaching us how to start over." Quote, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the sharp rush of emotion I expected. What I felt was warmth, like something heavy had finally set itself down and decided to rest. I placed the photo next to the wooden lighthouse on my shelf. The two seemed to belong together now, one representing the beginning, the other, the continuation. That afternoon, as the storm rolled in, I took a drive along the coastline. The wind screamed through the pines, and the waves pounded the rocks below like a heartbeat that refused to fade. I pulled over near the lookout, the one Ava loved, and sat there with the engine off, listening. There's a moment after every storm when the world pauses, when everything is stripped, raw but not broken. That's where I was now. The chaos had passed, but its lessons remained, that boundaries don't isolate you, they protect you. That walking away isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And that forgiveness doesn't always require reunion sometimes. It just means letting go without resentment. As dusk fell, I watched the lighthouse beam cut through sheets of rain. It wasn't constant, it flickered, disappeared, returned. But that was enough. Light doesn't have to be perfect to guide you. When I got home, I found Ava's email waiting. I hope the storm isn't too rough out there. Don't forget the flashlight in the hall drawer. Also, I missed the sound of your coffee pot. I laughed out loud. It was such a small, human sentence, but it felt like everything. I wrote back, "The storm's strong, but I'm fine. The lights are still holding. And so am I." That know the seam. Later that night, the power flickered and went out, leaving the house in darkness. I lit a candle and sat by the window. Outside, the lighthouse kept flashing, faint but steady. I realized it wasn't the same one from before. That old beacon, the one I'd set adrift months ago, was gone. This was the town's light, the one that had been guiding sailors for decades. It had been there all along. That's when I understood something deeper. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to yourself, the self you buried under everyone else's expectations, the one that never stopped shining, even when you forgot it existed. When morning came, the storm had passed. The world was blanketed in snow so bright it hurt to look at. The air smelled clean, like renewal. I stepped outside and breathed it in. My footprints, the first marks on untouched ground. Ava called as the sun broke through the clouds. "You survived the storm," she said. "Yeah," I replied, smiling. "Turns out I've been surviving them all my life." There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Happy New Year, Ethan." "Happy New Year," I said. "To new seasons and calm waters." After we hung up, I watched the horizon for a long time. The sea was calm again, the waves rolling and steady and sure. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the next storm. I was simply here, present, whole. I went inside, poured a cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk. The notebook lay open to a blank page. I wrote just one line. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with a roar, it comes quietly, like snow. Then I closed the book and smiled, because that was the ending I'd been waiting for. If there's one thing this whole journey taught me, it's that peace isn't passive, it's an act of courage. Setting boundaries doesn't make you heartless. It means you finally learned how to love yourself with the same consistency you once gave everyone else. For years, I mistook endurance for strength. I thought keeping the peace meant avoiding confrontation, that forgiveness meant letting people walk all over me as long as they called it love. But I was wrong. The truth is, protecting your mental health often looks like loss at first. You lose people who only valued you when you were useful. You lose comfort zones that kept you small. But on the other side of those losses is something priceless: clarity, the kind that lets you breathe again, the kind that reminds you your worth was never up for debate. Now, when I look back, I don't feel guilt. I feel gratitude. Because every person who tried to break me only showed me where my boundaries needed to be built stronger. Every storm forced me to anchor deeper. And in the end, the peace I fought for wasn't about revenge or control. It was about freedom, the quiet kind that doesn't need to be proven. So, what about you? Have you ever had to cut ties or set boundaries with someone who just wouldn't respect them? Did it make you feel guilty at first or lighter? Share your story below. Maybe someone out there needs to hear how you took your peace back too.